We began a new focus last week. Jesus came into the world with a promise. Jesus promised that he would give us life, and that we would have life, and that we would have it abundantly. And Jesus promises that abundantly. Not a life of abundance, not a life of a lot of money, not a life of a lot of stuff, but real life, true life, joyful life that is about relationships, the relationships that we have with other people, the people that God gives us to love, the people that love us, relationship with God, the source of all love and all goodness, that living in those relationships means abundance, means that we have more than enough, that we're not just scraping by, we're not just surviving, but that we have real life. The way that we live into that abundant life is simple. It's simple, but not easy. It's about trusting God. It's about trusting God to be with us, about trusting God to pour goodness into our lives. It's about trusting that God is the one who is ultimately in control. You know, sometimes you might get the impression, at least in America, that Christianity is about two things. That it's about believing the right doctrines and following the right rules. And then you're a good Christian. But that's not what it's about. It's about trust. It's like we sang in that first hymn, it's about trusting Jesus. It's about trusting God. And the Bible is full of stories that show us that that is the real point. The story about Abraham. We pick this up in the middle of the story, but you remember that the story starts in a very broken place, at the end of Genesis 11, where lots of terrible things have happened. You know, there's been the flood, there's been the Tower of Babel, and here is Abraham and Sarah. And they're 75 and 65 years old, respectively. They've never been able to have children. And it looks like this is it. Looks like this is it. The family that God has been blessing, it looks like it's over. It's done. There is no more. Until God steps into the picture and says to Abraham, look, it's time to move. Just get on the road. I'll tell you when to stop walking when you get there, and I will bless you with land and children, and you will be a blessing to the whole world. Now, the probability of a 65-year-old and a 75-year-old having children is probably zero in the way the world works. I don't know any 65-year-old women that have been having children. But they trust. Somehow they trust that God has some kind of plan. They don't know what it is, but they just trust that God has their best interest in mind, and so they go. And they're there for a long time. They're there for 10 years. And they have their ups and downs. You know, these are not perfect people. They don't always perfectly trust God. Sometimes they try to take things into their own hands. It usually ends not very well when they do that. But God is relentless. God's faithfulness is relentless, and he sticks with them. And they stick with God. They trust God. Not perfectly, but they continue to trust God. So in this, we pick up the story 10 years later. 10 years. God makes this promise, you'll have kids. It's 10 years later. And God comes to Abraham and says, I am your shield. I've got your back. And Abraham says, what do you mean you've got my back? It's been 10 years, no kids. I have nothing. I don't have children. Because remember, in that culture, children were everything. Not just because, as they were seen as a blessing, but children were your retirement plan. Right? There was no Social Security. You needed your kids to take care of you when you got old. He said, I got nothing. this slave in my house is going to take all my belongings, be my heir. And God says to him again, no. Go outside, take a look at the stars. Try and count them. That's how many descendants you're going to have. It's like the promise just gets bigger, right? It's not like God says, don't worry, I have this one son planned for you, it's going to be okay. No, you will have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And Abraham trusts God. He trusts God. Somehow, he trusts God in that situation. And then we have that kind of odd turn of phrase at the end of the reading. And he believed God, or he trusted God, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. And we think of righteousness as some kind of upstanding moral quality. But in the Bible, righteousness just means that you're right with God. That you're in a right relationship with God. That things between you and God are good. And how does Abraham get there? Does he get there by anything he does? No, by trusting. Simply trusting God. And we know that we know how the story works out. We know that it works out from that this trust really does bring blessing. That eventually Abraham and Sarah have a child named Isaac. And you know why Isaac has his name? Now, Isaac means laughter. Because when the angel came to tell Sarah at age 89 that she was going to have a baby, how do you think Sarah responded? Yes, she laughed. She was like, and what have you been smoking? The thing that we tend to forget, though, and then there have been dozens of sermons about how, and Sarah did not trust God and laughed, and what a terrible person Sarah is. Well, Abraham laughed too. We leave that part of the story out. It's just one more time where the way we read the story and interpret it gives women a bad rap. There's that other story at the beginning of the Bible too. But they both laughed. And the thing is that laughter became the laughter of joy. And so he had that name for his whole life. Because the laughter is, well, yeah, we weren't sure, but we did trust God. And we've been blessed. So it worked out, trusting God. It works out in the story in the Gospels too, where we have these two people that go to pray. They go to the temple to pray. And the thing that we really need to understand is that, we hear the word Pharisee, and if I say the word Pharisee, what comes to mind for you guys? Good guy or bad guy? Bad guy. Yeah, we think, the Pharisees, they're the bad guys. Well, no, they were the good people. They were the upstanding people in the community. They were the religious leaders. They were the people that were moral. They were the people that were, doing all the right things. If you had a house out in the suburbs, you would want a Pharisee living next to you because their lawn would be pristine. The publican, or the tax collector on the other hand, these were the dirt bags of society. And when we say tax collector, we think, some poor person that has to work for the IRS. Well, no. The way that it worked back then is, as a tax collector, you would buy a section of the province to tax, where you could go to everybody's house and tell them it's time to pay taxes to the Romans. And if you don't pay what I tell you, I will get the Roman soldiers to come and take it away. But the way you made your money as a tax collector was you overcharged. The Romans would say, hey, we need $100 from the people in that town. And so you would go in and you would charge them $400. And you would give the Romans the 100 and you would pocket the difference. That's how tax collectors got rich. So you can see these people were not really appreciated. Not only were they giving money to the Romans, who were the occupying power and oppressing the people, but they were literally making their living by stealing from their fellow Israelites. So that's the setup. And the thing is we look at the Pharisee, us, we look at him pray this prayer, I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people. I'm not a thief. I'm not a rogue. I'm not an adulterer. I am not even like this tax collector over here. I am so good. And we look at that prayer and we're like, Really? But in that time period, that was kind of like the daily prayer that Jewish men would pray. They would pray, I thank you, God, that you made me a Jew and not a Gentile. I thank you that you made me somebody that has means and not somebody who's poor. And the men, they would even pray, I thank you, God, that you made me a man and not a woman. Ugh. Not real, we look at that prayer and we're like, ugh. But that's what, that was the ritual. So, when people first heard this story from Jesus, they're thinking, yeah, it kind of sounds like a Pharisee. That's the way these people pray. And Jesus turns the whole thing on its head. Because he says, and this tax collector, whom you all hate, by the way, and I know you all hate this tax collector, he goes in and he doesn't even look up to God. He just says, God, please have mercy on me. I know what I'm doing is wrong. Just have mercy on me. A plea for forgiveness. And Jesus says, he's the one that goes home justified. He's the one that goes home righteous. He's the one that goes home in the right relationship with God, and not the first one. Because the first guy is trusting totally in himself. He doesn't really need God. He's perfect. Second guy, he knows he needs God. Now see, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I still want to live next to the Pharisee. Because the tax collector, he's going to go home and he's going to keep on robbing people. He's just going to get off scot-free. But it's all grace, right? But see, the beautiful thing about the Bible is that it's not just that little piece there. It's not just that one little story. The story that comes after this in chapter 19, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's about a tax collector. It's about a tax collector that Jesus goes to visit. Zacchaeus. You might remember the story. Jesus goes to Zacchaeus' house and he says, today salvation has come to this house. And Zacchaeus responds, Lord, everybody that I've defrauded, everybody that I've taken too much money from, I'm going to pay them back times 3. And half of this money that I have, I'm going to give to the poor. Because see, grace doesn't leave us unchanged. Trusting God, trusting that God gives us grace, trusting that God gives us love, trusting that God has our backs, frees us to live in new ways, frees us to be generous, frees us to love others. That's what happens. That's why that guy is able to go home right with God, and then that right relationship with God is what changes everything. That's what changed everything for Abraham. All starts with trust. That's where it starts with the tax collector. It all starts with trust. Leads to abundant life. And brothers and sisters, for us, it's the same thing. It all starts with trust. As we live more deeply into that place of trusting God, we have life, and we have it abundantly. Thanks be to God.